Yeah, we're live.
Okay, Excellency, scholars, honored guests, friends, ladies and gentlemen, uh, good morning. Welcome to this important webinar that begins the Belt and Road Institute in Sweden's webinars for 2026. I'm the chairman of the Belt and Road Institute in Sweden, and I will be moderator for today's webinar. Uh, I will also make some concluding remarks at the conclusion of the webinar after the speakers have all spoken. The theme for today's webinar is clearly outlined in the invitation letter that win-win versus the law of the jungle. What direction will EU-China relations take in this extremely turbulent world? I am pleased to mention that this webinar has two relatively younger Swedish men who will be speaking, both of whom are members of BRIX and actively supporting our work. And in addition, we have two new international scholars and friends who will elaborate for us their views on how to build win-win cooperation and avoid the escalating dangers of global conflict or even world war. There is a great deal that can be said about this world crisis and what solutions are possible. Most importantly, what kind of dialogue between Europe and China can guide us all towards a community with a shared future for humanity. I will make, in addition, some very brief, short remarks about, I feel, a responsibility to put the context of this webinar into the present situation that is confronting us all. There is, as many people already know, an escalating risk of a immediate conflict that could break out anytime in the Persian Gulf around a immediate threat coming from the United States and Israel to topple the Iranian government and replace it with who knows what and what kind of context this would occur is relatively unclear. But what Trump has publicly put out in the context of what we are discussing here is that he is deploying a massive, these are quotes, massive armada to force Tehran to the bargaining table over a deal that would end its nuclear program. And he has called this able to, quote, fully and rapidly fulfill its mission with speed and violence, unquote. The European Union is meeting today in the context that every Western European government, member of the EU, is actively engaged in supporting directly this operation in the sense that they are classifying in this discussion that is taking place today in the EU, the government of Iran and the Iran Revolutionary Guard as terrorists, which is linking them as if this government is nothing other than similar policies of Al Qaeda. This is the context in which we are holding this meeting. It is a grave and threatening situation, but by no means do I mean to say that our work or the work that we are engaged with in to prevent this kind of disaster is of in any way minimal importance, and quite the opposite. It becomes even more important. So I just mentioned this because I feel a responsibility to situate this discussion in the real world, that we are recognizing the need to bring out solutions that will lead away from the danger of international conflict and even global war. So with that, I would like to introduce our first speaker, the Honorable Juan de Gang, Charge d'Affaires ad interim of China's embassy in Sweden, and a good friend of mine. So, sir, Mr. Juan de Gang, you are free to speak.
Okay. Good morning, Stephen. So thank you for your introduction. And dear friends, as all of us can see, so since at the beginning of the 2026, the international situation is becoming more volatile and turbulent, with unilateral bullying increasingly rampant. At the same time, unilateralism and protectionism are on the rise worldwide, placing the international economic and trade order under strain. The world is confronted with greater uncertainty and instability. Humanity is at a new crossroads. Many people are asking, where the world heading? What kind of world should we build and how to build it? How should China-Europe relations develop? We believe that no country can gain from others' difficulties or maintain stability by taking advantage of others' troubles. To pursue a beggar-see neighbor policy or just watch from a safe distance when others are in danger will eventually land one in the same trouble faced by others. Therefore, in response to the critical questions that bear on the future of humanity, China has put forward its proposal, building a community with a shared future for humanity. This vision aims to build an open, inclusive, clean, and beautiful world of lasting peace, universal security, and shared prosperity. It's strategically guided by 4 global initiatives, namely the Global Development Initiative, the Global Security Initiative, the Global Civilization Initiative, and the Global Governance Initiative. And these 4 global initiatives meet the aspirations of the people worldwide for peace, development, and stability, and align with the common interests of both China and Europe. China and Europe are inspired by shared visions, supported by a solid foundation of cooperation and driven by broad development opportunities. The Chinese people has long pursued the idea of one world, one family, and believe that a just cause should be pursued for the common good. In the European philosophy, cosmopolitanism likewise advocates transcending national and state boundaries in pursuit of the common interests and universal peace of humanity. Today, China and Europe share joining hands again. As 2 major players markets and civilizations in the world, China and Europe jointly uphold values such as equality, justice, and cooperation. We together promote multilateralism and open cooperation, uphold the central role of the United Nations and the authority of the international rule of law, support the peaceful resolution of disputes through dialogue, oppose unilateralism and protectionism, and work for a more just and equitable international order. China and Europe can become partners in building a community with a shared future to bring more stability and positive energy to the world. From the viewpoint of practice, it's also shown that the vision of building such a community is highly realistic and feasible. High-quality Belt and Road cooperation between China and Europe stands as a vivid example of our common pursuit, open dialogue, joint contribution, and shared benefits. China has signed Belt and Road cooperation documents with 27 European countries. China Railway Express achieved an accumulative total of more than 110,000 freight services between China and Europe, connecting 229 cities in 26 European countries. Bilateral trade has grown from $2.4 billion when we established diplomatic ties to $785.8 billion in 2024. And the stock of two-way investment has reached $260 billion, forming an increasingly interdependent community of shared interests. China and Sweden are each other's largest trading partners in Asia and the Nordic region, respectively. Our two countries enjoy a solid foundation for cooperation, strong complementary, similar development philosophies, and vast potential in green transition and technological innovation. Guided by the Belt and Road Initiative, China and Sweden can deepen practical cooperation in multiple areas and achieve win-win outcomes. Currently, China is deepening reform and pursuing high-quality development through high-standard opening up, which in turn is generating fresh momentum for global development. Not long ago, the fourth plenary session of the 20th Central Committee of CPC and the Central Economic Work Conference were successfully concluded. It was clearly stated that China remains committed to openness and to promoting cooperation for mutual benefits across multiple areas. China will actively align with high-standard international economic and trade rules and expand market access and open up more areas, in particular in the service sector. China will promote the innovative development of trade, make greater efforts to expand imports, and pursue balanced development of imports and exports. China will also expand two-way investment cooperation, ensure both easy market access and accommodating business environments for foreign investors, and create an institutional environment that's transparent, stable, and predictable. China's highest and opening up will create new development opportunities for European countries. We look forward to working with Europe to build a community featuring shared interests, shared achievements, shared responsibilities, and a shared future. Together, we can help build a more just and equitable international order and system, and make greater contributions to peace and the prosperity of all humanity. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Wandegang, for providing those words of the direction that is possible for general economic and even cultural cooperations between Europe and China. I think that's clearly the vision that China has, as you have identified with the Belt and Road Initiative. And I think it is also incumbent on Europe as a whole to join hands with that initiative in a much more active and open way. And we shall continue to work together to achieve that. So thank you for your important remarks. I would like now to introduce our next speaker, Mr. Einar Tangen, Senior Fellow, Center for International Governance Innovation, and Chairman of Asia Narrative's 15th Five-Year Initiative, which he can clarify and elaborate in his remarks. You're most welcome, Mr. Einar Tangen. You have the...
Well, I want to thank you for having me. I have a little bit of a cold, so at this point, I might sound a little bit lower than I usually do. You know, we had an excellent presentation by the ambassador, or his acting ambassador of Sweden. It really lays out what China has been doing and how it sees the world. Now, I think in terms of talking about this, the things I want to mention is that I'm an American born in Washington, D.C. I was educated in England for a number of years. I've lived in China for a third of my life, and I'm on a Canadian think tank. So I have a number of different viewpoints. But the one that is overwhelming is the fact that this situation between Europe and China is due mostly to history and attitudes. And what I mean by that is, for the last 500 years, you've had a colonial system that Europe has participated, Sweden a little less, but there's still many wars, 2 world wars. But in addition to that, you can go back during that whole period. It was just a free-for-all of blood and things like that, and then it was exported around the world. So there was this idea that somehow Europeans were empowered to take things from other people. Now, there's a realization that that probably wasn't the right thing to do, but there's not really a lot of being done about it. It's just kind of like, well, you know, we gave things as well as took things. I don't know if that's necessarily equal. You have somewhere with that area that is now occupied as India, not occupied, is designated as India. At the time, that whole area was 24% of the world's GDP prior to the British coming in. When they left, it was 4%. During that period of time, they managed to, in essence, subjugate the people. They grew opium there, which was then sent to China. And that led to this 100 years of humiliation. So China has come a long way. They're determined not to go back to being a colonial vassal or plaything. And that's quite clear. And they built up an incredible economy. Their accomplishments have never been equaled in history. Europe, however, is still clinging to, halfway in the past. Past glories and things like this. They talk about the intellectual content of what they have. And a lot of it is true. There is a perspective there. There are great places of higher learning, etc. But it is still ideological, still hanging on to this idea of liberal democracy and capitalism, although it's tinged very heavily with socialism when you get to Europe. They become dependent on the United States, even calling them daddy, with Rutte. And it's a bit of a shame. At one time, Europe was the leading light, and America would follow behind culturally and in terms of ideas and things like that. But that has changed. The United States now is ruling the roost, and as they decline, they are becoming vicious. You can see this, threatening to take over Greenland, actually going and kidnapping the president and his wife of Venezuela, and then having the audacity to say that it wasn't an act of war. Threatening to take Greenland, 51st state is going to be Canada, and then you have Panama and threats against Colombia, and now we have this show that is going on in terms of Iran. So right now we're in a great deal of chaos. And a lot of that chaos is, as I said, I'm going to go back to this, is due to this kind of superiority that has been been a part of this kind of colonial experience. Europe had physical colonialism, where they actually occupied places, took slaves and do whatever they wanted to do. The United States saw that as distasteful and wasteful. It wasn't efficient. So we went the route of economic colonialism, inserting our dollar, making sure that we controlled the trade. And in essence, using that as a crutch to push ourselves to the very top. We were dominant, especially after World War II. I know this. My family was involved in building 28 submarines during World War II. We were part of the machine that won the war. And then afterwards, we switched over to civilian things. But this idea that we have to prevent World War III, that we do not trust the Europeans, continues today. So a lot of the things that we're talking about in terms of vis-a-vis Europe and China really have to do with history, attitudes, the ideology that has developed over that time. For me, it's much of it is just hubris. It's not substantiated by actual actions. It is simply preached but not practiced. So Europe is stuck somewhere in the middle, and it has to make a decision. That decision is getting easier with the things that Donald Trump is doing. This high-handed, I'm going to take Greenland, was not greeted very well by Europe. The irony being, of course, that Europe took many colonies, just waltzed into places and planted a flag and said, you belong to me. Apparently, it's not the same when it's the other, somebody else waltzing into Europe, claiming that this is somehow their colony. And the same with Ukraine. I mean, quite frankly, there's two different versions. I know most of the ambassadors here in Beijing, the European ones, always accost me and say, Einar, you have to convince them that they have to get on the right side of history, that they have to go against Russia. They have to join with Europe. And I'm always a little perplexed, and I always say, well, you see the war starting when, Putin sent his tanks towards Kiev. All right, they saw it starting when you participated in a putsch in 2014 that removed a pro-Russian president, corrupt, absolutely. But the fact is, he was elected in the process, and there was a move by the United States and Europe, both in support, to push him out and install, in essence, their own. Everybody that I know who's credible, who is in international relations, knew that if you go into Ukraine, it's not, will Russia fight you? If Russia will fight you, they will. And you can go back to Kissinger or any other things. And these were real politic people. These weren't hitting and wishing and what can't we just get along? These were cynical people who said, yeah, that is a step too far. It is a bright red line. Instead, Europe waltzed in and thought all of a sudden, when it became real and Russia pushed back very, very hard, they said, this is terrible. And they sent out word to the world indicating that this was a moral responsibility for everybody to get involved and that there was no choice, that a war in Europe somehow was far different from all the wars that, in fact, Europe had participated in. It was different from Iran, Afghanistan, all these kinds of places and things like that, and that there was a moral imperative. Now, the global South wasn't very interested in that, and they said, look, that's your business. You don't seem to care about our wars, and we're not going to get involved in yours, certainly. So where do we stand right now? Europe is teetering. They're trying to figure out which way to go, but it's always half pregnant. There are those in Europe who feel that after 3 years, it'll all go back to, quote, normal. That is wishful thinking. I was involved in running elections in the United States, and I can tell you that the bookends have, and they're not going back to, quote, wherever you thought they were at that point. America is having real problems. In 1971, 61% of the American people were middle class. If you take the same standardization, by 2024, only 40% were middle class. Yes, there were a increased number of upper middle class, but the fact is, America is fragile. Over 50% of the people are near what they, in China, they call the kill line. This is something taken from video games, where if you get hit one more time in the video game, you're going to be dead. And when 50% of Americans, more than 50%, do not have $400 for an emergency, and it'll cost somewhere between $1,500 and $3,000 to take an ambulance to the hospital, or if there's a death in the family or somebody loses their job, the car breaks down. These are cataclysmic and could lead literally to them being homeless. If you start looking at the situation with the Black Friday, the period between Thanksgiving and Christmas, and I know I'm talking about the U.S., but this fragility in America is playing out, and unfortunately, Europe is responding to it rather than seizing the bit and saying, "Look, we have to go our own way." De-risking from the United States is something very clear, but most of what I hear is about, we'll do something about the currency so they don't hold SWIFT over our heads. We'll do something about trade. But there has to be a renunciation of this idea that, the liberal Western order is the only order out there. That, when I say everybody is wrong unless they agree with me, it's very hard to have any kind of real negotiations. And I'm hoping that will change. So that's the way I see the situation as we're going forward. I know I've covered a lot of different grounds, but I do think, going back to my original point, this is about adhering to an ideology that is left, that is bankrupt. It might be good for their countries, and they're free to impose that. No one else is going to stop them. But they cannot, in good conscience anymore, insist that their system, which is moribund and not producing anything, is suitable for the entire world. It hasn't worked out. It's not working out, I think. So all you have to do is look at the GDPs of Europe, America versus the global South and China. Since the Belt and Road Initiative has taken off, there's a direct correlation between the global South actually being ahead in terms of percentage growth. Now, granted, they're starting at a lower base, but they're consistently higher in terms of their growth than Europe, which is, over the last 10 years, 1.3% growth? That's anemic by any standard. I know you're starting, you're at $19 trillion in terms of collective economy, but it is not enough to support you. Lost your ability to be competitive in terms of production and manufacturing. And there has to be a new way of dealing with the world, and it has to be cooperative. This idea that you're going to impose that should go away. So I'll leave it there and let the next person talk. Thank you.
Thank you, Einar. That was extremely helpful and insightful, both in the sense that you recognize the significance of historical processes that define the nature of the problem that is facing humanity and the strategic challenges that we are facing regarding a genuine cooperation between Europe and China. And the cultural matrix of these two countries, these two civilizations, is extremely different. But yet, if one has the view of building bridges, which I think is definitely the perspective of the Belt and Road Institute in Sweden, and I think your thinking would be welcome if we could only manage to bring forth more individuals like yourself in leading positions of decision making in relation to Europe and hopefully even the United States. In that sense, I think that both you and I are both born and raised in the United States, and we have a very different idea of how to go about that. That is not simply how to make deals, as the President Donald Trump is saying, but how do you build cooperation and friendship? So thank you so much for your input today. And I would like now to introduce our next speaker, Miss Kathleen Tyson. She is the founder and chief executive of Pacemaker Global, a fintech to build equitable, modern, and capital markets, and the author of Multi-Currency Mercantilism, the New International Monetary Order. I think she will elaborate in more detail how Europe and China can actually quite concretely and in terms of practical and factual economic perspective work together. So Kathleen, please, you have the honor of speaking now, please.
Thank you, Stephen, and thank you for inviting me. I'm going to bring a perspective of a long career in building global markets, because I see a lot of what I did is suddenly under threat because there's so much uncertainty being introduced. Just to give you a quick background, I started at the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, where I was involved, one of the founders of the Settlement Systems Studies Group, looking at the interlinkages between capital markets infrastructure and how systemic shocks get transmitted. So from there, I was brought to London to supervise global markets, the London Stock Exchange, Euroclear and Clearstream, the two global securities depositories, SWIFT, the global messaging network for banks, and other global markets infrastructure. Then I went to Clearstream to build new infrastructure, new capital markets. And I have an artifact here that's 30 years old this year. Cross-border securities, repo, lending, and collateralization. 3 markets that I more or less invented that were very hardly existent at the time. I wrote the very first tri-party collateral agreement for repo, tri-party repo. That market is now $11 trillion a day. I then went and built CLS Bank, which is a foreign exchange clearinghouse for the dominant 18 currencies. At the time, foreign exchange markets were about $630 billion a day. Clearstream, or CLS, currently settles between 3.5 and $7 trillion a day in foreign exchange transactions, with a peak of $14 trillion in one day. So that's big plumbing. That's what I do. I love doing that. I love delivering infrastructure that makes the world more efficient. But I now see the uncertainties, and particularly sanctions and unilateral actions, undermining those global markets. So I think we're going to have to build some new infrastructure, probably quite quickly and hopefully without chaotic conditions, but I'm ready for anything. I'm going to summarize the latest book, which is Multi-Currency Mercantilism, which was my attempt in 2023 to put a rational framework around the transition away from US dollar and away from dollar dominance to a more multi-currency, multipolar global monetary order. I could see that it was happening in real time, but there was a blind spot in the West that refused to even acknowledge that it could happen. You know, dollar must be king. And that blind spot worried me, because if you don't have a clear factual perspective on events, you're likely to make bad policies. And unfortunately, a lot of bad policy has been perpetuated. In summary, I'll go through what multi-currency mercantilism means. First, there are alternatives to the dollar. Countries have optionality, companies and banks have optionality that they didn't have a decade ago. The cost of technology is so low now that every company in the world, even a small startup, can be multi-currency. Through my PayPal account, I can settle in 34 currencies. With WeChat Pay and Stripe and other platforms that are now digital, Stripe, I think, has now over 100 currencies. So anybody opening up a business on the web, especially, can now be a multi-currency business. Every bank is a multi-currency bank. Governments are now multi-currency. I modernized a Nordic central bank about 8 years ago, which has real-time visibility of its 8 Nostro accounts with peer central banks, as well as securities balances at 14 depositories. So it has real-time collateral visibility across all of its obligations. That is possible now, because once you've written the software once, you just reuse it. And so I've now modernized through that platform 14 central banks onto real-time platforms. This is all possible now. It wasn't possible 10, 20 years ago. So every country, every business now has currency optionality. It can be a stable transition away from dollar, but, and I wrote this back in 2023 before events kicked off in the Middle East quite so horrifically, war accelerates the transition and makes it more chaotic. And we are seeing in the current administration, not just in the United States, but also in Europe and the United Kingdom, a willingness to use military force, ignore international law, and innovate structures outside of any accepted norms for national conduct. Most recently, Trump has set up an account in Qatar under his own sole authority to receive the revenues of Venezuelan oil sales. And he takes 40% cut off the top. And then Venezuela is allowed to have 60%, but Trump controls their access. So it's a fiscal choke chain on Venezuela. Now, they have done that before. The Federal Reserve Bank of New York hosts the account that all of Iraq's oil revenues have been going to since 2003, when the United States invaded and conquered and took Iraq. But at least there is a government involvement in that. Yes, the Federal Reserve Bank of New York uses that account as a choke chain on Iraqi policies, but it's at least government involved, unlike the account in Qatar. And then the precedent before that was the Al Yamana account at Bank of England for Saudi oil revenues, which again was an ill-transparent account, but at least you had a central bank and a government involvement in it. So there don't seem to be any rules anymore or international law. And that worries me, because it makes markets and trade and business much more uncertain. So other factors, I'm going to blast through this. No new hegemon. China doesn't want to be a hegemon. It doesn't want to run the world. It wants peer relationships with partner states for win-win development, but it doesn't want to replace the United States as a hegemon enforcing use of its currency with its military. Globalization accelerates. This is one I got right. At the time, everybody was talking about fragmentation being bad for the global economy. But I could see that if you take the 40% of the world that's subject to sanctions and you give them the optionality to do business with each other in any currency they choose, it actually accelerates globalization. And now Russia and China have a 98% settlement in their own currencies. Iran has been settling in other currencies, obviously. So was Venezuela, which is one of the reasons it was invaded, and it's Maduro kidnapped. The United States has, for very many years, enforced the use of dollar for oil settlements under the petrodollar doctrine, where anybody selling oil for anything else, it gets killed. And so, you know, Gaddafi, Saddam, obviously they tried to get Assad. You know, they now have Maduro. The petrodollar is not going to persist. It ended. I can even name the date, 9th December 2022, when President Xi stood there in Riyadh with the heads of state of the Gulf Cooperation Council and invited them to sell oil and gas in Shanghai for yuan. That was the end of the petrodollar. It's not going to come back. But the United States has a muscle memory, where it sees anybody doing business in anything but dollar for oil, that it must invade them and kill their leadership. I think we're seeing that challenged again in Iran. We'll just have to see how that plays out. But I do not think the petrodollar can be restored, even by the US military, even with the UK and the EU backing it. The angel paradox. Oh boy, did I get this one right. Norman Angel is the only winner of the Nobel Peace Prize for writing, for his insight that when two developed interdependent economies go to war, economic sanctions will hurt the sanctioner as much as the sanctioned. We've seen this play out in Ukraine, where the EU has imposed 19 rounds of sanctions on Russia, and all it's done is make Russia stronger because Russia was not interdependent with Europe. Europe has nothing Russia needs. And so Europe just got stronger and stronger under sanctions. And meanwhile, the EU has destroyed its own internal industrial economy. It's lost the chemical industry. It's losing the auto industry. It's been catastrophic. And the sanctions have actually backfired and destroyed much of the European economy. And of course, it's importing energy from the United States, vastly more expensive than the energy it was getting from Russia. Until this year, it was 35% more expensive on average. Now, this year, with the storms in the United States more than tripling the cost of natural gas in less than a week, it's going to be even more expensive. So that's the angel paradox. Resiliency, stability, and inflation. Well, here, we actually have some very optimistic stories that countries that are experimenting with new policies are achieving tremendous results and improving their stability, lowering inflation. The most optimistic story of this week is Zimbabwe, the poster child for hyperinflation in the 20th century, has seen inflation drop from 138% 2 years ago to 4.6% in January of this year. That's Zimbabwe, 4.6% inflation. And it's still falling because they introduced, in parallel with the existing currency, a gold-backed currency, the ZIM. And the gold-backed currency has stabilized the economy internally by providing an option for saving in a currency that would be less prone to inflation. It's worked. It's a magnificent model that deserves a lot of careful study for other high inflation prone countries. So yes, there's some very good stories coming out there. Gold is back. I have never been a gold bug. I've always considered it useless pet rock, but it doesn't matter because it's what we agree on. Most of the world believes in gold as a stable monetary anchor. And as the economy and global GDP shifts east to where gold is historically a store of value, it's becoming dominant again. So gold has replaced dollar as the principal reserve for central banks, and the price of gold is rising as demand rises. Yesterday, oh my goodness, just yesterday, one day, the price moved from 5,280 dollars per ounce to over $5,600 per ounce. 300. That's a more than $300 move in one day yesterday. So gold is showing us that the dollar is no longer an anchor. It's now a windsock, and it's shifting rapidly. And so the direction is in favor of gold again. Quickly, technology and infrastructure. I've already mentioned technology changes what's possible. I can now build a real-time, fully transparent, all operations central bank in less than a year. I can modernize any central bank on the planet in less than a year. I would not have believed that possible a decade ago, but it is now possible. And I can build real-time infrastructure that settles all over the planet. For securities markets, for capital markets, it's all possible. The technology's there. The technology is not the limiting factor. The only limiting factor is the vision and the will. So debt. Debt is the biggest challenge that remains unresolved. We're over $380 trillion in debt that's been issued. Quite worryingly, 3 years ago, there was a shift in global debt accumulation. Instead of private debt growing, private debt, commercial bank debt, stopped growing. And public debt overtook it, so that the majority of growth in debt is public debt, sovereign debt, government debt. And that tends to be low growth. It does not tend to deliver growth. So we've seen stagnant growth in Japan for over 30 years, stagnant growth in Europe for 15 years, decelerating growth in, recession actually, in Korea and the United States is still growing, but largely by drawing in growth from the rest of the world. So the stabilizing debt growth and returning to economic growth is a big challenge. I don't know how to do that. I wish I did. But it is the biggest challenge perhaps ahead of us. And finally, better is possible. I wrote the book to be optimistic, that if we collaborate, if we share models of success, like Burkina Faso, which is growing at a tremendous rate, or Zimbabwe, which has stabilized its inflation, if we look at the models that work and we replicate what works pragmatically, better is within our reach. I will stop there, I guess.
Okay, that was an excellent presentation, Kathleen. It gave us, I think, a lot of insight into the factual nature of what is actually possible if one can take themselves out of the given narrow-minded agenda, which, as Einar was also saying, has historical ramifications in which momentarily, in most ways, Europe and the United States are not fully prepared to embrace. The reality that you outlined is extremely enlightening. And it should, what disturbs me is that the essence of this webinar should, in fact, be something that would be broadcast over international networks in which the public, who is now almost virtually uninformed and consciously uninformed by general mainstream media in the West, would be able to get some additional insights into what kind of thinking we need to reestablish and build in a new way that will lead in the direction that we've spoken about, that is a community with a shared future for mankind. So, yes, thank you again, Catherine, for your remarks. I think you have clearly insights in your own work over your life that are extremely useful and helpful. And thank you for being here with us today. We will, of course, broadcast this webinar on YouTube. It will reach additional networks internationally, but as I say, I think this kind of discussion is what really is required to reach into the homes of the general public all over Europe and the United States. So, having said that, I will now ask our next speaker, Mr. Gustav Lansner. Is the social media manager for BRIX. He's also a board member of the Belt and Road Institute in Sweden. So you have the word, Mr. Lansner.
Yes, hi, thank you. First of all, I just want to ask our audience to please remember to post questions for our upcoming Q&A session. Yes, so yeah, as Steven said, I'm the social media manager of the Belt and Road Institute in Sweden. And I also want to say something about traditional media, which is that they really need to pick up the pace, as you were saying, Steven. And I mean, in Sweden, for example, the awareness of Swedes in general about what's going on in the world, these important, very important historical developments, is severely limited, I would say. And by that, I'm not talking about the wars and all the danger, but I mean in terms of all the positive developments going on in the world. Like China's development, their global initiatives, the BRICS, BRI, all these positive things, I think, would be critically important in these times to make people aware of. And I think that's an essential part of why media exists, right? Especially state media, as we have in Sweden here, for example. So, I mean, I would be happy to facilitate that if any of them are watching this. Like, get in touch with us, and we will be happy to help. But yeah, in the meantime, we have social media. So we're on YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, X, Instagram, and TikTok. So yeah, we appreciate it a lot if you guys, we rely on purely organic spread of this message for the moment. So we very much appreciate any help we can get with that. Okay, so now I want to get on with my remarks. Since joining the Belt and Road Institute 2 years ago, I've learned a lot about China, of course, but I've also learned a lot about European history. And some aspects of European history are quite unknown, I would say. So yeah, I wanted to share some of that with you here today, some of what I've learned. The title of my remarks is Isolated Empires or Connected Republics, a renewed commerce of light for a win-win world order. Your Excellency, ladies and gentlemen, friends, we are living through a historic and dramatic shift in world politics. This shift is too often described as a simple reshuffling of so-called geopolitical power. In my view, these developments hold the potential for a deeper principled transformation, one where the interests of the many finally outweigh those of the few. As a Swede, a European, and a board member of the Belt and Road Institute in Sweden, I see the BRI and China's global initiatives as a concrete, hopeful pathway toward a genuine common good for all of humanity. However, many, not least here in Europe, remain skeptical or even unaware of these ideas. That is why today I want to share how a deeper look at European history uncovers unexpected intellectual bridges between East and West, bridges I believe are of critical importance right now. The natural starting point for this discussion is the cradle of European civilization, ancient Greece, where Plato, widely regarded as the father of Western philosophy, first articulated a vision of reason and justice. In The Republic, his spokesperson, Socrates, rejects the notion that justice is merely the will of the strong, a clear stand against might makes right and the law of the jungle. The Platonic tradition, later enriched by early Christian thinkers such as Augustine, formed what we call Christian Platonism, a synthesis that binds a love of truth with a love of humanity, and provides the cultural core of Western civilization. The very word republic comes from the Latin res publica, the public thing, and denotes a system that rejects arbitrary monarchical rule in favor of governance for the common good. That republican ideal, born with Plato, was smothered for centuries by a competing law of the jungle mindset, dragging Europe into the darkness of the Middle Ages. After roughly 1,000 years, the Renaissance revived Plato's ideas, ushering in a golden age of science and culture. The light of that republican ideal then helped inspire the birth of the American Republic, a concrete embodiment of Renaissance-derived principles translated to the New World. But in Europe, the same light was abruptly extinguished by the catastrophic bloodshed of the French Revolution, which gave rise to an authoritarian empire. Soon after, the old European powers turned their imperial ambitions against the fledgling republic across the Atlantic, smothered its republican promise, and converted the age of exploration into an exploitative colonial enterprise, a dark legacy that still endures. I hope and believe that today's profound shift in world politics will transcend that legacy. By turning the power-centric structures that now dominate the Western political landscape into inclusive, collaborative frameworks, everybody benefits. But how do we do that? The key is to locate those optimistic and constructive ideas in their most concentrated and refined form. And that's exactly what we find in the work of Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz. Born in Germany in 1646, Leibniz stands as the culminating Renaissance mind and torchbearer of the Christian Platonic Republican tradition. While he drew heavily from ancient wisdom, he was also a first-rate scientist. Among his many achievements are the independent invention of calculus and the creation of the binary system that underpins today's digital world. Far from being a dry, isolated scholar, Leibniz was a prolific correspondent. His letters, articles, and manuscripts filled dozens of volumes, and scholars estimate that it will not be until the 2060s before the entire corpus has been fully examined. Today, Leibniz is best known for his groundbreaking contributions to mathematics. What many people overlook, however, is his deep and sustained fascination with China. Greatly intrigued by Chinese culture, he exchanged letters with Jesuit and Franciscan missionaries in Beijing and immersed himself in Confucian classics. Fascinated by the I Ching, he saw a striking parallel between its hexagrams and his own binary notation, and he praised the Confucian emphasis on moral governance. In his later writings, Leibniz coined the phrase commerce of light, describing a silk road of ideas, a multinodal exchange of knowledge, culture, and values that readily reminds us of today's Belt and Road Initiative and the broader Global Civilization Initiative, both of which strive to deepen mutual learning and cultural exchange between civilizations. Leibniz argued that science is not confined to physics, engineering, or even the natural sciences in general. It also furnishes a rational foundation for morality and law. In his view, human beings possess an innate capacity for both reason and goodness, and exercising those inner capacities allows us to discern right from wrong. Building on this insight, Leibniz formulated the concept of natural law, the idea that universal rational principles should govern the relations between peoples. By these principles, Leibniz contributed significantly to the development of modern international law, shaping treaties, human rights conventions, and the rules that underpin today's global trade system. Today, China's economic ascent, under the leadership of the CPC, provides a clear, reality-based illustration of that principle. Its high-standard opening up policy is a scientifically guided strategy that has lifted hundreds of millions out of poverty, while deepening integration with the world through a rules-based, internationally compliant framework, demonstrating that openness, when anchored in shared legal norms, can be a source of strength rather than vulnerability. When reason governs both economics and morality, friendship becomes the logical outcome, while the notion of making enemies for security reasons contradicts the very principle of a moral order that seeks the greatest good for the many. People are fundamentally social beings. Just as isolated individuals become vulnerable and depressed, isolation in the form of so-called geopolitical blocks is also a sign of illness. In the same way that companionship strengthens a person facing hardship, mutual cooperation fortifies societies against the pressures of a turbulent world. I regard Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz as a true paragon of European civilization, a luminous exemplar of the optimistic, human-centered spirit that defined the continent's finest cultural achievements and a model whose thinking can inspire us today. By embracing Leibniz's vision, we find a coherent path to rebuild a partnership that aligns Europe's deepest philosophical heritage with China's current uplifting trajectory. Let us engage in a new commerce of light and usher in a win-win world order and a shared future for mankind. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Gustav, for those very wise words and broader perspective of what I will remark more about in the end, the significance of, as you've taken up, the great universal thinker Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz, in my view, as an essential aspect of linking a more profound idea of how to build bridges in the deeper thought processes of China and Western civilization, European civilization, which should be the framework for how to establish cooperation and friendship, not only on the economic issues, but on the deeper thought processes, which are fundamentally the essence of the human character. So that was very enlightening and I think very helpful for how to actually establish the direction for making the Belt and Road Initiative a living and dynamic process that will lead us away from the horrendous danger of what is the law of the jungle and all of its immediate threats. So I will now introduce our next speaker, Mr. Thomas Carlson, who is a researcher and a member of the Belt and Road Institute. He can elaborate more a bit about his own work, but he has written a number of articles now for China Today, one of which was a summary of Xi Jinping's latest book on China's governance, things which are simply censored and avoided in the mainstream Swedish media and European media, I think, in general, that would give people at least a balanced insight into how to critically understand and analyze what the initiatives that China has and how we can create a debate or discussion, a dialogue that would give this country and Europe as a whole a broader idea of how to approach the challenges that we have in this crisis. So I give you the word, Mr. Thomas.
Thank you, Stephen. 女士们、先生们，大家好，领导们，大家好。So I'm the guy who started learning Chinese in 1997 when no one was learning Chinese, and there was only a small department in Lund University where you could actually study it. And I didn't. No one really knew anything or cared about China at all. You know, 40 years ago, China was still at the beginning of its remarkable trajectory that has gone through until this day. So from there, and my name is Thomas Carlson. My travels have taken me to China, where I've lived for more than 15 years in Beijing. But actually, I've been traveling back and forth to China since 1997, basically. A big part of my life has been spent there, and coming back to Sweden to live here. And I noticed that I've been able to witness the three stages, you know, coming from where no one in Sweden knew anything about China, then to a period where China all of a sudden became very popular, and globalization had its, the rising of the tide of major globalization and businesses reaching out and interconnecting with China. And to now, where the climate is unfortunately changed for much the worse. So my my outset or my thinking in writing my articles has been from the perspective of trying to lift awarenesses for Swedish audiences mainly, but hopefully to anyone can read my writing that don't know so much about really what's going on in China to kind of broaden your vision and be able to see what is really going on. As I see it right now in Sweden, especially, when you read mainstream media, the mention of China or the Chinese leader Xi Jinping cannot be done without adding the word dictatorship or dictator in front of it. And which has a very, very dangerous and unfortunate consequence. It means that, for most people in Sweden, they don't even dare to read more about China, or they just see those labels that China is a dictatorship, and therefore it is dangerous to even to learn more about it, or to be curious about what's actually going on. And everything that is said by administrators or officials from China is interpreted from that lens as just basically what it means is that most people see, China is a dictatorship, so therefore we cannot care about it, just like a small country like Libya or Iraq or something that has been previously targeted by this kind of rhetoric. But China is different. China is a much larger international force, and Europeans are especially doing themselves a disservice to ignore the reality of what is really going on in the country. So in my articles, I write to try to lift out and tell the story of what is actually going on, and try to make people a little bit more curious, and maybe go beyond simply just labeling the country as one thing or the other, and afterwards just stop caring about what's going on. We all the speakers, the great speakers, Einar Tangen and Kathleen Tyson and Wang Degang and Gustav Lassner has already pointed out, we live in, and Stephen, of course, sorry, my apologies, have pointed out that we live in extremely volatile times. At this present moment, it feels like Europe is, many Europeans are at least partially waking up to the fact that, yes, the blatantly obvious fact that the role of America is changing, and European policies need to change in accordance to this fact also. And also we see that luckily that some European leaders are reaching out and exploring other strategic partnerships outside of the United States, meaning that they're diversifying their partnerships and relationships. So this is, I think, very important. It brings a significance to the times that we are in right now, and means it's very, very important to also to get a deeper understanding of what is going on in Asia. So from the perspective of most Swedish readers, I think they don't know anything about China, and they don't really know anything about the community of shared future for mankind, and all the initiatives that are raised, and they think that China is only working in their own self-interest, as they would assume, whereas in reality, when you see the concrete actions, not only the words, but the concrete actions by governments, by the Chinese government and officials, they are willing and always open to participate and to contribute and honor their commitments to international bodies and different trade agreements in Asia, and also that stretches beyond Asia and to other parts of Latin America, etc. Now, this is of course the behavior of a much more consistent and much more reliable kind of economic power, and it's it should lie in all Europeans' interest to also to recognize this fact, and try to and start to open their eyes and see that China is something that we could and we should explore different mutually beneficial cooperation opportunities with. But we can only do that if we kind of take away this lens of coloring something a certain color and then stop paying attention to it. We have to go a little deeper and actually start exploring it here. Now, I know I'm talking today to our distinguished, colleagues here who are all in the know and know this, for a fact, and are much more eloquent than I am. But this for the general public, I feel like this is something that we need to also think about how to actually bring this message out in a way that they can understand and start to become curious and start to actually demand that their representatives are also taking action in terms of their own self-interest, which should be something that relates to peaceful coexistence instead of spending all our money into building more advanced weapon systems and speaking of the rhetoric of sanctioning more countries and threatening with other kinds of coercive measures, etc. Cooperation should be something more in line with that. And so with this analytical lens, I've written a number of articles and that have been published in China Today and also republished on the BRICS website, where I try to show the concrete actions that are taking that are actually happening and the Chinese government is taken to build themselves as a more reliable and open economy. And the latest article, I talked about the opening of the free trade port in Hainan province, which is a small province, but it links very well with what Einar was talking about, the long-term strategic thinking of the 15th five-year plan, where it's not an accident and it's not a spurious opening up of a free trade area. This is part of a long-term strategy that has been, you can trace back to maybe the 10th or many five-year plans. Is consistent and very predictable in a way, kind of almost boring way of progressing their opening up towards the world. But in the Hainan trade area, we see them taking another concrete step, all connected with legal frameworks and clear demarcations and long-lasting systems that can last for a long time. If you compare this with the policies of other Western countries that tend from day to day to raise or lower tariffs or sanction this country and then sanction another country, this is much more consistent opening up trade policy, which I think that more people should be paying attention to. And I hope that we can make it possible for them to actually pay attention to this development also that's going on there in the West. Many exciting things are happening, and I will be continuing to write and to explore this area for myself. There's so much to learn here, and we have to move a little bit beyond simple ideology where you have always some people talk of capitalism versus socialism in the economy. The reality is that every economy is somewhere in between, and we have to look at balances, and we have to look at how we can move forward together to reach these lofty goals of building a more peaceful world built on development, where people are living, can start to build better and more prosperous lives every day, instead of building weapons that kill our brothers and makes the world a more miserable place. So this is my action, and what I like to write and think about how to communicate. And but the barriers are tough with the mainstream media kind of using their language and model, and most people therefore becoming now very afraid of looking out and questioning things. But I would like to connect with Gustav Lansner's idea that we have to remember that as Europeans, we have a great tradition of critical thinking. A lot of critical thoughts on the economy comes from Karl Marx and Adorno and yeah, many critical thinkers coming out of Germany, and also Leibniz, as you mentioned. And but nowadays we are almost afraid to be critical and to open our eyes and look at beyond the headlines to what is really going on in the world. And I hope that this seminar can be a part of opening up this venue for people to explore. And I think that's where I will end my speech. And thank you for being invited, Stephen. And I'll bring the word back to you.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Thomas. It's inspiring, and one of the ideas in terms of this webinar, which I consider to be a breakthrough for our association here in Sweden, but is working the Belt and Road Institute in Sweden, is actually in my travels and work, and my colleague, who is the vice president or vice chairman, I should say, of the Belt and Road Institute, Mr. Hussein Askari, who is unfortunately not able to be with us today, but has been very much actively engaged in exchanging and interviewing individuals like Einar and Kathleen, which we will continue to do. But the possibility now of opening up even a webinar, for example, in Swedish with Swedish speakers like Gustav and Thomas, and as I think you may have gotten the idea of Thomas's initial remarks, he's married to a Chinese woman, and he's fluent in Chinese and knows China for a very clear inside part. And this is the kind of thing that can crack the deliberate attempt of certain power forces and control apparatus of the mainstream media, which is a tool of a certain intelligence process, from preventing the general public from understanding what's really going on. What I would like to say briefly in my closing remarks, and I would say I haven't yet seen if we have a great deal of hopefully certainly some questions from our participating audience. If not, we will nonetheless, I think, have a type of interaction among the speakers based on some of the points that have been raised already in this dialogue, and we can see how that will unravel. But what I want to say is a number of things. Number one, in addition to being the chairman of the Belt and Road Institute in Sweden, which was founded in 2018, myself and my colleague, on the basis that even at that time there was a clear refusal, or at least a policy in the mainstream media in Sweden to ignore the ideas behind the Belt and Road Initiative. And the importance of this initiative, going back to 2013, to this day, have not been presented in any competent manner to the general public in Sweden. In fact, it is virtually prohibited. So beyond that role of maintaining and developing the Belt and Road Institute in Sweden and in Europe, as we have members of a number of European countries called, in a WeChat account called Europeans for the Belt and Road. And I would invite Einar and Kathleen to be welcome to participate in that. I'm also a distinguished research fellow at the Guangdong Institute for International Strategies, where we explore ideas along the lines of what we're doing here, how to build cooperation and friendship rather than accept the implicit idea that power structures collide. The geopolitical view almost automatically that the interests of China, the interests of Europe, the interests of the US cannot really be common and based on a universal idea, which my colleague Gustav outlined as what Leibniz and certain earlier Renaissance thinkers referred to as a concept of natural law. This is not just a formal agreement, as although these international agreements under the UN and originally the Peace of Westphalia are very, very important agreements that should be respected. But as we see in, for example, what's going on and has been going on in Gaza, that the Israeli leadership is violating every basic concept of what is respect for human life. And they are behind, together with the US policy right now, threatening a new war with Iran, based on the idea that they are doing something which, in front of the eyes, we have seen that is being done by Israel. And even though there has been criticisms of that, nothing has generally been done to put a stop to this barbarism. We're at a point in history where, in my view, we have to make a shift in this typical geopolitical, my interest is not your interest. The idea that the US and China are automatically not friends, but competitors in the best sense, or in the worst sense, adversaries. That is going to, under present circumstances, is threatening the very existence of humanity's future. So what I also will now mention is something that I have not usually put out in the public context, but at least among certain individuals that I've been working with as a consultant, as a philosophical educator, is this, what I call the Leibniz Project. And my colleague was identifying Leibniz in his remarks. I won't go through that in detail in any way, especially not in this context, but it is a factor of how we are going to address the problems of so-called diplomacy in the international arena. My view, and I think it is essential, we have to lift the level of dialogue to a higher and more profound idea of philosophical and theological reality, which embraces, for example, this idea of natural law, and make that the foundation for how to pursue dialogue and interaction. Now, that is a lot of so-called realists and cynics. Well, that's not possible. People are not capable of understanding deeper ideas. That's esoteric. That's wrong. First of all, it is challenging. But when you look at the history of European critical thinking, it has been built on the profound ideas which created the United States. The thinkers like Leibniz were directly involved in the creation of the American Foundation and Constitution through Benjamin Franklin, who was a follower of Confucius. These connections are never addressed, or rarely addressed, perhaps in academic context, but not in the context of a living dynamic for how we can, and the populations of not only China and Europe, but of the world, can interact to establish a framework for what we are seeking in this idea of a community for with a shared future for humanity. So there are many examples, because I study these things in depth, and I am prepared and have offered, even in Sweden, in Swedish or in English, the possibility to make interviews, to raise these questions, to elaborate where it is of interest or questions on why I am saying that this kind of deeper thinking is what we need to revive. This was the highlight under Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz's time of the late Ming Dynasty, where Jesuit missionaries who had earlier been like Matteo Ricci, Li Madu, had created this notion of a broader cross-cultural foundation. And I'm finding young people who I work with mostly, that is what inspires me, because that's the vision for the future. If Trump and his warmongers in Europe, who are now seeming to join his hands on Iran, are successful, they will destroy the future for the young people. They will take it away from them. And that's not tolerable if we are going to survive as a human society. So I have been studying this. It's a brilliant little document called On Friendship by Matteo Ricci, which has been translated quite nicely by an American professor whose name is Timothy Billings. But the theme of this On Friendship has a framework where there was a genuine effort to build and understand how two civilizations, which have different characteristics, cultural matrices, but yet have the basis for universal principles which can establish genuine friendship, not simply practical diplomacy as to how we're going to avoid a third world war or a new conflict, but how are the common principles that unite humanity. And these are things which both Einar and Kathleen are pointing to in their important work in data and factual efforts. And we are going to maintain that effort here in the work of the Belt and Road Institute. I believe we can expand it. I've been talking to young friends in China where I have just written an article on the theme that we have had here, entitled "The Fate of Humanity: A Community with a Shared Future, or the Law of the Jungle, a Crossroads for the Ages." And that's being published today. I will share it with who's ever interested. But the idea that I'm finding, especially among younger people, is by thinking more profoundly on and understanding these philosophical thoughts as not just something under the pragmatic daily kind of events, but as something that should shape the events with a deeper thought process in which we can have certainly dialogue, even debate on different views, but one that is open and not censored by this kind of liberal, neoliberal idea. And that neoliberal idea, which is threatening us, has an underlying factor, which is a reality that when I actually, as a younger man, was studying psychology, you have a term called ambulatory psychopath. That is the idea of somebody who's walking around, and there are films and horror films that are made on these types of potential killers that live in some kind of fantasy world, but is a dangerous world of violence. And what we are seeing now is a situation where viewpoints and opinions are replacing the idea of the search for truth and the idea that there is a means of discovering and coming closer to reality, which is not being tolerated. That is why the liberal model is failing and threatening. They are so caught up in maintaining their own ideas about what they think is right. They exclude any ideas which do not simply maintain their agenda. So we need to challenge that. We need to do that in a very passionate and hardworking way. And I believe that if we do that with the types of solutions that we have heard from what is possible from Kathleen and from Einar, as well as from Gustav and Thomas and Councillor de Gang, we can do it. It is very possible if we are effective enough in putting a stop to this type of virtually psychotic or insane behavior. Because it is, at this point, this law of the jungle is insanity because of what it does to directly threaten mankind's existence. And there has to be a means of which we bring back a critical thought process that engages populations in how we can put an end to this and lead the world in a better direction. So thank you for all of you for participating in this important dialogue and discussion. I hope we will continue this. We will work hard, and even maybe harder than before in 2026. And I would welcome both Kathleen and Einar to join us again. You are more than welcome. And I think we have a framework for how we can raise the banner for a better future for humanity. And I think we can work together to do that. So thank you all so much for participating in today's event.